Should we start? Yeah. If you want. Yeah, please. Didn't like that one. What's the this way? This way. That's up and down.
I have to go. I'll call you later.
Tashi Puki Geshe Metokram Rira Lingshi Yunde Empadi Sangye Shindu Mite Giwargi Drogen Namda Shinla Chiparsho Hidam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Ninyatayami Sangha Jidam Zaki Jognam Janchu Vardu Dakni Gyapsuchi Dagi Jinyangi Petsanangi Drola Venchir Sangha Druparsho Sangha Jidam Zaki Jognam Janchu Vardu Dagni Gapsuchi Dagi Jinyangi Petsanangi Drola Venchir Sangha Druparsho Sangha Jidam Zaki Jognam Lam Janchu Vardu Dakni Gapsuchi Dagi Jinyangi Petsanangi Drola Venchir Sangha Druparsho.
Thank you, chanting master. want to get this paper, Michael?
Oh, we have the photo?
I'm not sure if there are any outside.
I'll go look.
Yeah.
Before I printed it, 25.
Last.
Yeah.
Okay.
If they don't have enough Geshe for next week, I can project on the computer here from here. Okay? So then they can watch. Okay? And then maybe no need for copy.
So today I'm going to little review,
Yeah.
right? Then we will continue is the part of the super person draw. Then firstly I have to say good morning, good evening. Nepali is a good morning, United States good evening. I'm so happy. It is great. Great colors. It is great to see you again, Ra. Then we discuss about the source of open good. Then firstly I'm going to review. Then we will continue is when we kept last month, then it's going to continue. So
Thank you for teaching again. Thank you, Geshe. Thank you,
it's my
Geshe.
pleasure. Then 또 수고지요. 왜 눈도 또 들리는도. 아니 로로로 건들라. subject 로로로 납샤오로. 인도.
Just
okay.
This has inside. People want to look at this and then they can return it later.
It's good.
So there's only 6 copies people can share, like one here and one here.
I've got some we can share.
You can look and get the book back later and we'll find it online.
Does someone find the page that it's on?
The website?
No, the page that it's on.
What page are we on? What verse are we on?
We're starting at the beginning.
Are you reviewing from the beginning, Geshe?
Yeah. We'll do the review at the beginning. Is it okay?
Yeah, I think this is good.
Yes. Now I'm going to little review. 이제 제자한테 다들 콘도디 주인들 콘도디 지기도 아니 이제 자기에게 상당히 이해도 편도 들어라. 미신 말을 해서. 아니 유대시 좀 말이 돼서 그제 단다. 먼저 람비림바 뒤에 받대기 슝디 살아라. 제단에学经年的这个不就可能没那么说了，学经年的람비 리바다 이게 속이 산에다 이게 남지 고방마도 거두다 토백이 있다 람지 리바다 차동을 뛸때 맞아 람지다 뒤에 때가 있다 그래서 람지 뒤에 지금 또 알아 어디에서 인사해야지.
So this text, the source of all goodness, it serves 2 purposes. It's a very condensed or the brief instruction for the entire path of enlightenment. Also it serves as a prayer book where you can pray, your kind of inspiration for you to attain the entire steps, the path. You can use this as a prayer text as well. And so this is sometimes referred as the condensed text of the path of for enlightenment, and it's composed by Lama Tsongkhapa himself.
어디에 샤슨 다 소소교회 산에 이게 라메즈의 장주 마토파도다 이게 마토파도인데 람지를 막 차동할 때 중요한 다 라는 요즘에 장주기 람디 토백이 있다. 이게 콩디 가네려고 그러잖아. 이게 소소히 기념라 마테바이나 안라는 요즘에 장주다 살람 이름바 가리나야다. 유라 마케바 인상 아니 담보 걸었다다. 다 인제 꾸기시기 진전제 순회에다 이게 삽진이 이거는 신으로 람디타와 신이 땐돌당 아니 때는 로장도 이 삽진이 이거는 책도 순회로 다다 쇼로가 담보디.
And so, in this condensed, the instruction for the stage for the entire path, basically it's starting from the a very kind of beginning, how you really treat your spiritual teacher until the instruction ends, where you actually engage in the final practices of enlightenment. And so it kind of inclusive and consists of the entire path in this condensed instruction. And so, for example, it starts with the how do you really treat your spiritual teacher. And so in the first stanza, it kind of divides into two sections. The first section is telling that all the knowledge and the instructions of your spiritual practices come from your teacher. So your teacher is become the source of your entire the path to enlightenment. And this is the first kind of point in the first stanza. And then in the same stanza, Amatungaba then goes on to say, then how do you really practice? How do you really treat him? How do you really engage in that proper treatment of your teacher? And so the first stanza has a 2 point. First, explaining the source of all your knowledge, the spiritual knowledge is the Guru. And then, how then do you treat him? So that's basically the main point of the first stanza.
남비춘의 시바이나 남기타와 신이들도 순거에 있나야다 남바에 있나야 남보 마이나에 있나래 기기인데 따진 거 임바데다 수이나에 따 케빈 거버디 개청거에 샤라스네로와 남바다 남보미 수이나 수속이다 까이나에 예나에 비는 남사디다 중공디 수속이 산에 달로존의 수속이 단 라바인 세기인데 따진 거 임바데다 남바점 마이바 남보 마이니에 케빈 거에 쓰니.
And then, from the Buddhist point of view, that your spiritual teacher is considered the source of all your knowledge, of course. And so you treat as such a very kind of, you have this very incredibly precious and the sacred the feeling toward your teacher. And then generally if we talk about the teacher, it's regardless of Buddhist and non-Buddhist. The teacher is considered very sacred and very precious because it is the teacher's kindness that we really rely on to attain knowledge. Even as a very kind of young age, it is somebody you refer as a teacher who would teach you, say this is A, this is B. Without having that kind of a facility, the help, we are not able to gain any knowledge. And so, teacher, when you think about teacher, you immediately start thinking about teacher, this source of all your knowledge. This is how you treat him or her as such.
아니 달람림 바시인데 당고코라 달람기자와 신이 떼줄 시고에 된다 저거디 인사를 했으니로 람기자와 신이 떼줄 시고라 때네 람기자와 신이 떼줄 시고에 대한 소속이다 터바 강체바데 기인선에 터고와 그러와 뭐 터바 강체바데 기인선에 터 안텔라 삼 텔라 존도치 카드 조 터선 공도체 제대다 제발라 때네 때는 로 간데 장고거디 다 제일려고 보인자 남기자와 신이 된소데 뭐라 체 디제라다 텔라 때네부터 로 장단에 간데 지어면다 삽지니 버디다 로 장단 이버시고에 다 디인사를 했습니다.
And so first, before we engage in any practices, we have to study, we have to hear the teaching. and you hear the teaching from your teacher, from your spiritual guru, and having really heard the teaching, and then you contemplate, then you meditate. And so it starts with hearing the Dharma, the teaching, and that's why it's such a sacred being, because through that medium, if you like, you hear the precious teaching, and because of that, then you are able to practice. And so in the Lama Tsongkhapa identified one of the most important phenomena in the Buddhist teaching is the teacher, because thanks to him or her, you're receiving the teaching. And therefore he really put this right at the first, if you like, the priority in the stage of the path, and saying how you treat and how you recognize the sacredness, the preciousness of teacher. And then he, in the second and third kind of stanzas, he teaches then how you train your mind.
그래서 징예디 다소소 라마 기위싱이고 딱 세디기다 가서 세디나 치만 이가기다 디 징예디 소소 기계 인사 아니 보다 팅체체 제수예디 아니 살람 유토바 소소 기라 살람 유토바 개바 징예디야 아니 소소 기계 인사 때라 제스네 팅체다 제니라 고 디셔로는 눈이 근거도 알라 비엔자 인테고 예수기 팅체체 수신 때만 남기 싸워다 그 팀청보다 제이나 콜라텐다 칼리스테 모레스나 수신 때단들라 니 이성도 다니로 삼배 때단들라 주에 때나 이 공부시 삼배 때단들라 소소겠다 대화치에 돼 뭐라고 다 주에 때단디 아니 가신 주에 주변 여버체 숨바는 주에 때단데 또 남은 기회시니까지 수신 주와 이바이나다 주에 때단데 인사해 뭐 대다오데 통내다 레버 통내 아니 소소기다 매수 도미 요번에로 아니 달라다 그십시에나 어디 요번에다 소소라만 기회시니디 대인사라 그거지고 대버치기로 소연이 이
And so I'm going to read the root text, and then I'll provide a brief explanation of the main point. I'm reading from this, the source of all my good. I'm not sure whether we have the same text. The source of all my good is my kind Lama, my Lord. Bless me first to see that taking myself to them in the proper way is the very root of the path, and grant me then to serve and follow them with all my strength and reverence. So here, it's in English, it's very self-explanatory. Basically saying that source of all our goodness is our kind teacher. Why is the source of our goodness? Because through hearing the teaching, we are able to overcome our short weakness and really attain all these good qualities. And so when we have this kind of wonderful qualities in us, and that provides us the kind of the happiness and so on, and therefore our teachers are very kind. So that's why the teacher is kind to you, because through his or her teaching we are able to attain these wonderful qualities in us. As a result, we're able to overcome the suffering, and isn't he or her then kind? So that's where the emphasis on the kind. And then they say, my Lord, Geshe. This is because he is a Lord, since him or her is considered Lord, because it's our teacher who really enable us to attain liberation. Once we attain liberation, of course, we do not need to wander in the samsara. And so, Lord is someone who really saves you from all the troubles, from all the sufferings. And because it's our teacher who provides us the instruction, and when we follow that properly, then we're able to eradicate all the causes of the sufferings. And therefore, it's considered a law. And then, and in the next kind of stanzas, is kind of telling us how do we really then treat such a sacred teacher. And Lama Tsongkhapa mentioned there are two ways we can treat. One is through our kind of thought, in our kind of thinking, how we really think of our teacher with devotion. So the man, what kind of thinking should we use toward treating our spiritual teacher? And the answer is devotion, faith, and so on. And then how do we really, in practical, how do we treat? I'm saying by really following the advice properly of the gurus. This is the best way of really, if you say, treat your spiritual teacher, is by listening and following the advice, the proper advice of the teacher, with respect, reverence here. And so this is how we really should think about our teacher, how we treat and how we really cultivate the devotion in our spiritual teacher. Because if we do that, then we will receive this amazing goodness, the great qualities.
어디를 했으니 근데 얘기 된다라 단다 삼배 된다라 주요 된다 이게 나네 삼배 된다라는 대바 소속이다 그셔도 대바 지구의 수행인데 이게 최인제 차단 남사와 대바 지송고 말해서 왜냐면 가서 계속 주요래 얘기 된다는데라 소속이 당고 딱제치 지금 노안의 시험에는 로순다 라마도 로마니가 딱제치 되는 loksoyore 로순 딱제 제마도는 소속이다 나와 같이 지르는 최대 바 롤링체 추로랑 공부시 얘네 리치네다 소소로 편도 영상에 삼나 아니 신이 얘기 된 거. 얘기 된 사람이다 내가 대박 로고 이면은 남편은 순간 남이 싸워 신이 땡수도 로고 있는 수분 유주라다 사람이 또 개버진다 파샤 겸주디안 겸주 남다디다 유라키 말에서는 순유래에서는 딘데 송상 결혼도 먼저 겸버도 킹게 사워도 마침바이면 남자 다 이게 남배주 돌린 제세 차나라 기계 임바 두세 균이 샤고 말에 쌤 내가 말을 그래서 뭐도 추로란데 두세 샤야를 뭐도 나 결혼도 기계 상상 요 말이 니 결혼도 기주에서 나 균이 매선 결혼도 편도 요에 디니가 아니 결혼도 그게 대바당을 또 남만 된 거는 니가 니가데 디치고를 뭐도 남자 추나지 년바다 남자 기계 차고다 기주 차고다 이렇게 말에 쌤 아니 소위 대바 제사네 텔로마게 개천 보시고 돼서는 대내처에는 아니 신르바는 제 차례 신르바들라 아니 여러 개니게 말에서는 뭐 대내 스페셜도 와서는 개천 보래했습니다.
And so Lama Tsongkhapa mentioned that we should really treat our spiritual guru with the devotion, and this is how we really conceive our teacher with the devotion, and then we treat him properly by following the guru's teaching and advice. Here it's very important to mention one point. We are not saying that we should do everything our gurus are telling us, and you have to really examine. And for that reason, in kind of Vinayana text, in the sutras, it mentioned that a disciple should really examine the guru at least for 3 years, up to 3 years, to examine if this is a valid teacher. And that's where the importance is placed on the investigation and the cross-examination of your teacher. Before you really receive and consider someone as a teacher, spiritual teacher, it's extremely important to first of all examine, check. So if we're not able to examine someone for up to 3 years, maybe at least for a couple of years, do your own research, background check, and so on. Make sure that this is a proper and reliable and standard teacher. This will really be good for you. And because once you really treat someone as a spiritual guru, and then if you go against his or her advice and go against his or her wish, and it would only bring you harm. And so it's really important initially to examine. And the sutras also mentioned that once you consider someone or accept someone your spiritual guru, and then you go against the person, and then it's not only be very harmful, Also even your refuge vow will be broken. And someone who take refuge and then go against your spiritual guru, it will really be a contaminated vow, if you like. And therefore, it's very important. For that point of view, you do not have to consider someone as a spiritual teacher or your guru by attending 1 or 2 teachings or by just sometimes going there and hearing teaching. That doesn't make you, him or her, your spiritual teacher. And first of all, it's really important here, for example, tonight, I do not consider you as my disciple or student. So shouldn't consider me as your Lama. We're just here to kind of discuss and debate about the Dharma. And so it's important, first of all, to really hear someone's teaching, check and do the examination of that person. Because once you accept someone as your spiritual guru, and then if you go against that person, and then it's considered as a very serious misdeed. And for example, in one of the metaphors that used in the sutra was a broken samaya, or the connection between a disciple and student is like a kind of a rotten tree of a person. When a tree is rotten from its root, regardless of any other conditions, it will not bear fruit, if you like. Likewise, when you have really this broken samaya, spiritual guru, then you will not able to really contain any qualities and the goodness.
When I fish has a way of Tawana lay, Lord John Jumela, Yishikawashi, and Koranta, she would think in the Koran Pije, Kavara, the Hosum, the Kerala, the Haramang Tambo Lambare, Jela Koranta, Yayana Molochi, and that Sudan and Tandata, then I must sound a 3 day and a Chadish house and on the day we are Dilata, Tonjo you less and said the Lame, Gigana Moloche, said the like women bata. Tapo you are Topa was in the fire, that's also you do not say you do not get down there. Tapu should Chadish house and Koran, Sinichiba in the day, Koran the Sumutana, Tarun, Sik Tomba, also the Toman, midday, Chawashi would that there is some like Gigana Moloche, is allowed Tamjasha, and so you don't that. Our lawyer and then a hundred how to shoot in the shoe shells and what the list that you lay to one and the little showers that is in a row.
And one example that the Tibetans here in New York talk about for such a broken samaya, broken pledge, is there was a great scholar 15 years ago. A Tibetan monk, a scholar who passed his Haramba degree, and he was considered as one of the top scholar in a monastery. But then he had this broken pledge with his teacher. He really fell out with his teacher, and he came into the United States because he really went against his teacher's wish and did a few things. And as a result, regardless of the effort that he's making, that he's having constant problems, troubles, and so on here. And a few friends of mine really told me about his case, saying now he's falling in this most terrible condition and situation, and people believe that because of his broken pledge with his spiritual teacher. So usually in the sutras, when they talk about the consequences of such broken pledge with your teacher, is either it's really written in this very life so people can observe it, or it kind of takes longer, and maybe if not this lifetime, in your next lifetime you still bear the result. So here we just got one example to see how this broken pledge affects the individual life.
어디에 시라서는 다들만 대시잖아 뭔가 다는 것도 뒤에 시를 넣어서 딱 이게 견나버서 결혼도 남림단이 남림 신기 요가 있나 아니 담보다 식시디 봐 된산에 되는 내가 소소겠다 남은 외신이 사춘고 인단이 직상도에서 담보래 아니 사춘고 인단이 가르쳐서는 수수유인데 나지게는 텔라테는 중화를 세네로 아니 소소게 사람이 또봐 가래에는 남만 텔라테는 중화디 소소 하고바에는 신에다 얘기했는데 소소 다 전청보다 사춘고 챙기래 세네 뭐 되게 템비톤에다 난다 쇼로가 지도 정말 인바이나 되네 편충고 소소다야지 소나 지금 만다월에 들이 켜버려 살에 쓰네로
And so, although we have a number of explanations and examples to give regarding this very topic, the relationship between a guru and disciple, but due to limited time, I'm not able to do so. And so in essence, when you use this text as your prayer, the inspirational prayer, and basically when you recite the first stanza, there are three things you just need to think about. By really reading this, you think about how the sacred and the precious is your spiritual teacher. This is because all the knowledge, the good qualities that you attain from practicing your Dharma is come from the teacher. And therefore the teacher is very sacred, and all the wonderful experience and the qualities that you attain from practicing the path and the ground and so on is coming from this teacher's instruction. As a result, the teacher is also very kind to you because you have these most amazing qualities by then, and they all come from the teacher. So naturally you feel this warm feeling toward your teacher, and when you kind of do such analytical meditation in terms of thinking how sacred and precious they are, how kind they are, and so on, and by reciting this text, you get this natural warmth and special feeling toward your teacher, and that's how the practice should be.
number 2 the topal lesewa resini so lama da sangyesa lama tsaji bu tsibu du kharan dine topal lewa imbaina anjela ma tuwa tin chi yin sini.
And then of course sometimes you would have this doubt, the question saying, why should we treat our spiritual guru more important than Buddha himself? Well, we will do later question and answer session and talk about this.
tanda sholowa ibadi tanda lamyi tsawa shingi tunsu da sholowa thambana tsuba che ta tene lo jangdan de la ta sholowa ibadi tene lo jangdan de la bomba shewore senero ta ye subject ni table lamyi tsawa shingi tunsu da tene lo jangdan ni yena na ta lamyi tsawa shingi tunsu di sholowa thambana tsuba che tene lo jangdan de ta sholowa ibadi go tsuwore senero.
So the Lamrim condensed text is basically divided into two broad categories. The first category is how you really treat your spiritual guru, and that's it. And then the remaining falls into the second category. Once you really follow such instruction and treat your teacher properly, then how do you train your mind for the path? And this is where starting from the second stanza. So from second stanza onwards is the kind of actual instruction about how you train your mind.
Subject she samlo tangore senero tene lo jangda subject sum samlo tangore senero subject sum de paresena ani lo jangda de la kibu chumuda tumoyo langa lo jangda ani kibu dinda tumoyo langa lo jangda ani kibu chimbe langa lo jangda subject sum samlo tangore sen
kibu chumuda tumoyo langa
kibu chumuda tumoyo
chumuda deni
tumoyo.
And then once the second subject starts, how then actually you train your mind? And that's divided into three sections. The first section is the small scope, and then it's a common practice. Then the second is the medium scope the practices. That's also common practices. Then the third one is the great scope of practices. That's uncommon practices. I'll explain you later.
Subject determined the current thing of drain and guarantee the Lavin you draw for a ratio, Lavin Gombe Kalata, subject of some time thing, Madova in by anything, Lavin you go pound in the Lambi, Rimba Sungsara, a Rimba the church who is a race and things for a subject in a brutal by Inbaina, and it's also get a samlo time in a any Gom Javna and Kabu for a decent Kabu to a Vitu is a race. Now, I told you we take Chevana, getting the home of Wazani, something is which have with things. Jerubusieta, Kibuchmo, Tumula, Jin, Tenechimbo, Diladition, a dean with a diladition of Portic, Langaramos of Patiensaro, who did it for a subject on Bojula de Caravia, Yodo in the visit to use
That's it. So, when we talk about the categories, then the sections, and then the subsections, and so on, people easily get bored because it's become too dry. But this is a really meditation manual. It's instruction for meditation, and the instruction is as such. It has to be a stage, steps. You have to follow these steps in order to really get the full benefit of the instruction. It's like an operational manual. You really have to follow 1, 2, the second. As a result, we have to now and then to refer to the steps and the sections and so on. Because without that, then you're not able to get the full benefit of the instruction. Because if you just pick randomly and practice, you will not have the full benefit of the quality of the instruction. Because the quality of the instruction is in stage. Stage meaning steps. In a such that the first has to be in a first, and you cannot really shortcut. Therefore, it's really useful if you could remember some of the much broader steps and the stages of the instruction.
Then at the day, Mora de Tang Drove Kabla, Project the Low Mao Bardo, Sevo Bardo, Chagan Tabu, the Mao Babe Kabla, Drova in Yangachimbo, Sevo Bardi, the Drova in Yangamavas. It is on that. That's all the selling of the Tarba Tamjin you go on to the Lata. Give a chimbe Lamla, Lojo, so Chiborina, Kibuchu, the Tumu Lamla, Chick Rose, Tidrotan, the Hamago in Bena. My engine and Yangai in Roa. These are for the Kibu Chumula, the Dingla, the Chumula, where the Kota Kibu Chumula Teneta, Tocha in Bada Panja in Bakeja Mares in Roa. Samba Gachijunda, a lot of Gachijun on the Denta, Tewa member Lamne, Tewa Chumbola, Lord Gachijun with the Samba Gachijun. Kiran you only like Kibu Tewa member than Kibuchumo Sumbare Mato, so that you could member than Doksha in the Kisha in Samares in Roa. Then Yankadi Yang Salumi Yankadi called them Hako to the Lani, Kibuchum Lamba Lojang, Kibuchum Dringy Lamba Lojang, and the Shini Kibuchum Lojang. Kibuchum Lojang Bekalata, somebody Shantadili, Kibuchum is somebody in the Kiwaina, Yankai over the Hakurua, things at the Hamo, the Hakuwaina. That did somebody market and the line, Pangrinchina, Kibuchum Lam, Kibutingilam, Kibuchum, Pangrinch in the sugar deeds, and Yang Sala, Monument to the
So, the importance of following the stage, the different stages, is very clear. Best example could be a traffic light. We follow the traffic light all the time. And when you drive, when the red light is on, obviously it brings you in danger.
The light is in it, you were driving to us and ticketing was in it.
And regardless of our kind of rush, we still have to follow the traffic guideline. And if you cross on the red light, it's very dangerous, and also you get a ticket penalty. Likewise, when we practice the path to enlightenment, we really have to follow the stages. And when we say the medium scope, the higher scope, and so on, the main important point here is these stages are really laid out according to your kind of the scope of the mind. As we are not saying this teaching is a higher level, more profound, and that Kibuchum, the small scope of training, is not considered as less important or less profound than the great scope. We're looking from the subject's point of view, our kind of understanding level, and at our understanding level, you have different stages. So this like a scope is basically talking about our, the scope of the mind. And so the benefit is when you follow this through the stages laid out by Lama Tsongkhapa in the text, then it's really more suitable for our the scope, our understanding or our tech. As we really engage in the small scope, our mind is really see the benefit and the disadvantage of the small scope. And then you move to the next scope. You see the advantage and disadvantage of the next scope, the medium scope. And then our ultimate goal is really go into the Mahayana, the great scope practices. But the importance of studying the first two, the predecessors, is because you only appreciate the great scope as a great scope when you understand the limitation of the first, second scope. Without really fully comprehending the small and medium scope, you would not appreciate the greater scope. And so really studying the small scope really has its wonderful benefit by doing so. And that's where also it's really important because everything is relative. The great scope is relative to the limitation of the medium scope, and as the medium scope is also the relative to the limitation of the small scope. So that's where you really study and understand fully the content of the small and medium scope, and that will give you the confidence in the great scope.
당마다 subject 이번 때는 로장단들 subject 수명변나네 subject 숨기나네 다 당보들라 기부충도 투미에 랑다들 로장단들 subject 시상도 장모래 인데로 subject 시디 가르스나 아니 딱 대절기 최초비된 미르디 사실은 상도지 당고래 했으니까 대외되는 인물들 그거 아니 치워미다고 제모를 했으니 아니 렌들에 이신이 오래 했으니까 아니 겨워다 되고 랑도기 있는데 하고 했으니까 뭐 대용을 렌데지 시우디야 렌데 게디 랑도시 렌들에 이신이 오 숨바디체 시바디 니 겨워다 되고 랑저가 도착하는 게 하고 했으니 대행상 하나 디 시디다 맞아 소소 기보다 기부 충무의 투몽도다 맞아 이다 냠솔는 거 기부 충무 나이에 대해서 소 라니 지부 년성의 동안 타나님이 로교가 된거 가서다 기부 충무 숨을 살아야 되네요. 라니 지부 년성의 동안으로 타나님이 로교가 된거 가서다 기부 충무체 기부 딩디 년성의 동안 좀 많이 봐. 코와 타다기 동을 타나니 별로지라 디베 간사들라 기부 딩지 알아 기부 첨벌라 얘다 셈제 탐저 코와 타다 아니 코와를 타러 마세 셈제 탐저 코와를 타러 쳐봐야 아니 소소랑기 지일라 얘들라 기부 첨벌이야 생으로 사디 람르나도와 안사나 아니 지부 타버 등유리고는 기부 첨벌 숨고래 했으니 람르나도 근데 송시아 생이 뭐 텐다비 줄라딘베 간사테나 아니 소소 기부 이 통원도 냠도 렌통이 람인자 아니 기부 충원도 통원 람 숨게 살했으니까 그래서 단다 기부 충원도 통원 나에도 충원 기부 충원이 따로 좀 디나를 다 계절와 또 맞서 디나로 또 맞서야 단다 대주기 최대 밀려디 맞사치면 맞아야 삼로 땅 거래 했으니 알아 이 삼로 땅 거인 거이나 땅 두고래 아니 단다 처음에다가 테네 딱 공나에 맞아 공투로 와 아니 레귤이 이치냐 어디시 디 소소기보에 냠술렌토 기부 충분에 냠술렌 거 투모와 인자 수이 냠술렌의 렌토가 인자 아니 투모와 남지
투모지 소소기보에 냠술렌 디
기부 찬다 아니 지구 타버더니 로귤라딘데 간사디야 냠레 제통이 디인사 라민자 아니 기부 충분도 투모가 로장나에 투모가 디인사리 sabje shijido wotela lojana jibwenza tumo fungue
so once we start looking at the three broad dissections, the small, medium and great scope of the practices, now we're going to start to talk about the small scope practices. And the small scope practices has a four main kind of sections. The first one is thinking about the preciousness of a human birth. It's like the leisure and the endowment of the human birth. That's the first one. The second one is then meditating on impermanence. That's second. Third one is understanding the cause and effect. That's third. And the fourth one is then making the right choice between the wholesome and the unwholesome action. So these are the four main sections in the small scope practices. And so then here would be useful to give a definition of each scope of the practitioners. And the small scope of the practitioner is basically defined as someone who is only interested to prevent oneself from falling into the lower realm, including the realm of the animals and so on. So when you really struggle to attain the higher realms by observing certain practices to protect yourself from being born in the lower realm, is the small scope of practices. And then the medium scope practices is not only you really prevent yourself from falling into the lower realm, at the same time you really try to overcome all the suffering of the samsara, the birth into the samsara. So you really struggle for self-liberation, the liberation for individual purposes, for your own kind of benefit. That's the definition of a medium scope practitioner.
Queen 기부충의 딩이라 samul so the ranichibu taba tundungi lu dingi chiba chinya re sen kunyala ro ranichibu taba tungi iba chibare samul ta dungal pangdan de la chigi ranichibu nyefung yu dungal sung chigi dingi khorwa tada gi dungal pa dingi la pangja la khabar duala sambala khabar kenyama.
So the differences then between the small scope practitioners and the medium scope practitioner is obvious. From the motivational point of view is same. You're only interested gaining happiness for oneself. And then the differences is for the small scope practitioners, they will really try to attain the higher ranks of the samsara, whereas the medium scope practitioners is trained to get the liberation from the samsara. And so the differences is their goal. But again, the beneficiary, if you like, is still same for their own interests. Then the next one, the third one is the great scope practitioners. That is great because not only for oneself, but also really interested and inspired to attain enlightenment for all sentient beings. And for that purpose, you really commit and engage in the practices. So that will be, like a cause for the liberation for all sentient beings. So you're not only interested attaining liberation for yourself, but for all sentient beings. And for that reason, you really engage in the practices. So now you understand why they, divided into the different scopes, and you understand what is they mean by scope. And then usually in the London you would come across, there's the small scope practitioners with a common part, the medium scope practitioners with a common part, and then there's the great scope practitioners with the uncommon part, and so on. So this common meaning for the small and the medium scope practitioners, the common practices is regardless of your own kind of liberation from all others. You still benefit from the common, like meditation on these four sections. I just talked about the meditating on the leisure and endowment of the human birth, and the impermanent, the karma, the work of the karma, and then the choice of the so on. These practices are common, both for thinking about liberation for yourself, and common for the attaining the higher status in the samsara, or also attaining for liberation from samsara, because these are just common practices that both the scope of practitioners can use. And so the definition of these different scopes of the practitioners were mentioned by Lama Atisha in the lamp for path, the lamp for illumination of a path. You can go further the reference in that text.
다 단다 거랑 삼바 개체지 요원이다 기부 주문 기부 딩 기부 주문 다다 여체도도 왔으네로 아니 대과 주문라네 대과 주문라네 삼바 개체지 요원이 대과 멤버도 대과 주문 차벌면도 안 대과 멤버래 되고 방제 임바다 기 대과 주문라에 랑제 멤버 계절인데 말해서 예자 단다 경험 무지 거에 바게 되는거 송송하스네 어디래스네.
And so if you look from this point of view, and when you talk about the scope, and then now we appreciate that these scopes of the practice is really nothing to do with the level of the if you like the profoundness of the teaching, but it's rather from a subject point of view that these are the distinctions there for the practitioner's point of view. And so sometimes we hear this word Mahayana practitioners, the Hinayana or the Theravada practitioners, and the people have this assumption that Mahayana is obviously considered as a more precious teaching versus the Hinayana Theravada. But His Holiness made it very clear at the beginning recently that from a practitioner's point of view, Mahayana is the one we should accept. The Hinayana we should abandon. It's not from that point of view. The importance is from a practitioner's point of view. You see, the teachings are really relative to the scope of our mind. Obviously, the greater vehicles are people with a much greater, if you like, the capacity, greater scopes of the mental attitude and so on.
다 대나는마도 기부주모도 통일하는 subject 시점에는 subject 시간이 개침부시고 레시아스네로 소소의 남녀는 최년년 제임바이면은 다 시디야 고지 삼로단에 공을 개와 임바이나 때는 삼바나 또 교화태 소 subject 안다 시디다 소 유저단에 리당교사레스네로.
So these four subjects that we just talked about, thinking about leisure and endowment of human pleasures, to the recognizing the unwholesome and the wholesome action and following such the proper choice. And these before there's usually for the antidote meditation, and they are really important and they are very useful. If there is a way that will really transform your mind, it is these four teachings really have the impact on you. If you really wanted to have a practice with a greater impact in your attitude, in your heart, you should really meditate on these four subjects because they are very profound in terms of really impacting your thinking.
람빔 공개나 담보 텐저는 무슨 거래? 선에 텐저 사시는 거 ten고래. 선 담보 거라고. 아니 공개니 임바이나 아니 담보 가서 단다. 구론 쪽을 상도 담보래. 선이라 구론 쪽을래. 선이라. 아니 최년래 제와 임바이나 레기도 소 상도 담보래. 디송샤 선이. 람빔 나가로. 대인사 람빔 공개 간사들라 수에나다 람빔 공개 간사들라 담보 거라 텐저디 사춘부 인바지 하모고나 때는 좀 기타 찍대나면서 나버렸어요.
For that reason, Lama Tsongkhapa explained in the Great Treatise. This is by Geshe Pabunkapa. The Jinin was a commentary on the Lamrim Chima, the Great Treatise, Namdrila, the liberation in one's plan. And Geshe Dejin explained that someone who really considers oneself as a Lamrim practitioner, the minimum three qualities you should have. The first is really have this clear recognition of how precious and rare human life is. Without having recognition on that, then remaining practice would not be effective. So first of all, you really spend time cultivating in your mind stream how rare and precious this very life is. And then secondly, for the meditation purpose, you really have to cultivate the intention, the altruistic intention, the motivation and so on. And that for meditation is also very important foundation of all other practices. And then people also start meditating on the cause and effect, the relationship between cause and effect, and having really good understanding about these three subjects will really tune your practices and make your whatever the practice, the spiritual you're doing, make it a very powerful one. And so that was advice given in the commentary on the Lamrim.
또 sabje 당고 이제 tenju moyo songwa 소데 tenju moyo songwa 라야디 맞다 더워지던 저거 좀 참이다 밀르디 다 무시를 자체 모임 송고래 세네로 대회 때인데 단다 제를 무시에 라면이 양고나라 대회 때인데 20 놀래 확 송으로 다 20 노고를 하고 송해도 tenju이 최초에 되는 밀르디 20 노고를 하고 송해디 20 노고디 세디에 우분고 동화세요 마도 세치마이 우분고 동화세 동화에 세네로 다 마소기 좀 단다 밀르디기 다 세디에 동화 다 하자자 세치마다 타르바다 텐주기 고방 다 고하던 예수의 동화 차원세 동의인자 아니 20 노고를 하고 송고도 왔으니 삼자랑 나라 팀이 미드로 멋이 받들려기도 직지를 보셔야 니니를 보셔 소소들을 보셔 마하고 와인바인 소소 사진 뭐 찍기를 했으니로 사진 뭐 쓰다라 니로 사진은 나 소소랑 제가 좀 와인바인 때문에 팬도 중요한 말이었으니로 사진 뭐 쓰다는 나나라야지도 때랑 제제 잡으러 말해라 맞아 다른 것도 rumbuchi 뭐 사진 뭐 다른 뭐 rumbuchi 사진 뭐를 딱니 캡선 손계니 캡선 땡거를 삼로디 키니까 소소 요로준 제거했다 rumbuchi 뭐만이 잡아래 쓰니 어디에 삼나 랍디에 쓰니.
And so when we think about the leisure and endowments of the human birth and the rarity, how rare it is that we gain the leisure from the lower ranks, and thinking that is really very useful. And because once you really have a good understanding about this human birth, the preciousness of the human birth, then you will really see yourself as the most precious being. And because in Lama Tsongkhapa's the short version of the Lamrim, he referred human birth as the wish-fulfilling gem or jewel. This is because, generally speaking, when we have a precious stone and so on, and then able to only provide us our need for this life, they're not able to really do anything beyond this life. But this precious human birth really provides you all your need for this life as well as for so many future lives. And so it's even more precious than what we consider as the most precious gem and so on. And so I used to tell people when people say, "Oh, this is this Rinpoche, this is that Rinpoche," and for me, people are not really understanding that they are also Rinpoche, the precious one. Because when you really understand how precious our birth is, and if you wanted to understand how precious our birth is, then you should meditate on this first section of the learning practices. And if by really recognizing how rare and precious the human birth is, and then you really have to take advantage of it and really make it meaningful. And by really being self-centered, self-cherished kind of being is west of your really precious being. You really by understanding how precious it is and then really take the full advantage of this birth and really make it a good use of for this life, for next life, then you are having and being a meaningful life.
killing kinda susu milu rubuja sachi mo yin ba ajane killing wo ta cheki mali ni me na samlo tang ba yin ba yin na ta zambulin de ta simje roar ju simje 차단다 속다 되니 그냥 대난에 그냥 미기다 젠드로 두리면됐다 미디기다 세디에 또고또 가리나 따도 배서 제도도 와서네로 다 키네데 바주이네데 코로나에 저다니 로아심제던데 대화도도 동을 면도가 찍바라 이내 미나시고 탑시 제도면 도와서네 어디가 켜버 쇼고 도와서네 어디 차네 소소겠다 최케 말리지나 어떤 미기 휴먼 라이브 당연히 아침에 쉬버려서는 꼭 다시 가리는 죽통이 되셔서니 킬링으로 왔으니로 아마서 남비처럼 인다게 있어요.
So once you really recognize the preciousness of the human birth, for Dharma practitioners, of course, there are a lot of logics and reasons and explanations so on to cultivate that recognition. And then even for a non-Buddhist, someone who do not follow the teaching, it's so obvious when you compare the capacity of the human beings versus animals. And the human seems, I think, obviously has much higher intelligence, because humans are able to really overcome a lot of problems for this life. And obviously the humans are, or the human birth, have advantage of finding all the solutions. I mean, this, like animals, we all desiring for happiness and avoiding suffering, but they seem to have much more limitation than we do. And from that point of view, you can see how precious human birth is, even for non-followers.
대저기 최초에는 밀루기 땡라다 세직 루이젤라 상기겠다 소속이 즉 제토가 연관은 세직 루이젤라 상기에 누가디다 밀루기 땡라 샤워를 먼저 도와서 산다기 땡라 샤워 균요 말로 왔습니다.
And so, if you really wanted to attain the enlightenment in one lifetime, it has to be the human life, human birth, and you cannot really find other kind of lives as more comparable to human birth.
대인산단다 삽진이버디 식단다 쇼로원이버디 된다디 삽제 당보디 된다디 시고를 세네로 대주기 최초에는 밀륜디 따지고 있나니 그렇죠. 따디 가르스나 렌징예베 테베 템상데 신도녀가 된지 시주 년생군도 인고 렘베도 괜찮은 저 진일로 쇼로가 찍되기 다 대주기 최초에는 밀륜디 따지고 있는 거 승고를 세네 인지도에 직송자는
이런 식으로 찍어.
쇼로가 찍어.
And so, in the second stanza, as we read, bless me first to realize. So, when we talk about the four the sections, the first section is the understanding the rarity and the nature of the preciousness of the human birth. And this is now being explained in the second stanza of the text. It starts, bless me first to realize that the excellent life of leisure I've found just with these ones is ever so hard to find and ever so valuable. Grant me then to wish and never stop to wish that I could take its essence night and day. So basically this is referring to the first subject of the four meditations, the leisure and endowment of a human life. So should we have a 10 minutes break to give you guys loosen up? Oh, sorry, not loosen. To give you a break.
To give us a bit more leisure and fortune.
Is it okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, how are you?
Did you understand that, Sam, or do you need me to explain?
Yes, just as we talked before the culture, somebody's thinking, thought it's time to start.
You need me to explain it?
Because you explain how to drive. How do I?
Yes, okay.
What I like to do is,
What do you like to do?
let me just pause there. Hey, buddy. When I am assembling a tripod, I like to